My name is Claire Smith-Warner. I'm Head of Spirit Creation and Mixology for Belvedere Vodka. It's my great pleasure to be here today to talk to you about sugar, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're not here to demonise sugar this morning. We're here to really just make you more aware of the sugar that we consume, particularly in cocktails and mixed drinks. And I'm joined on stage with Damon Gameau, who is the writer, director of that sugar film that was recently launched and you'll be seeing more and more of in the media. So I'm going to just kick off with an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at, of course, sugar, the good. What's good about it? When you consider what's written about it in the media, you would consider that sugar is the killer stealth ingredient invading our bodies, making us fat, making us unhappy, killing us. So is there anything left to actually love about sugar? Particularly if you consider that within our industry, the drinks industry, sugar is part of our cocktail DNA. It appears in the cocktail definition. It is something that we sell just as much as we sell of alcohol. So is there anything that we can really see as a positive takeaway from using sugar in our cocktails? Why do we need sugar? Why do we use sugar? We're also going to look at the bad. So sugar and its addictive qualities being linked to having some of the worst causes of obesity, metabolic syndrome, essentially making us very unwell and very unhealthy. And Damon's also going to look at the ugly, where sugar is hidden, and also how it masquerades as a health food, particularly if you consider how we talk about agave in our industry. So I'm going to pass over to Damon, who's going to start talking about his experiences with sugar, and particularly talking about his movie. Over to you, Damon.
Hello. Is this on?
Yeah.
Now? Hi everybody, thank you very much for coming. So basically my story started about 7 years ago. I drank 2 Cokes a day, I smoked a pack of cigarettes, ate lots of pizzas, as most men in their mid-20s could attest. And thankfully, just in the nick of time, I met a really beautiful woman, and I kind of changed my entire eating habits to impress her. In the first couple of weeks of our relationship, I pretended to enjoy all these kind of health smoothies that she was making me and organic avocado on chia seed breads, all these really weird foods. But I started reducing my refined sugar and kind of felt much better for it. People started commenting on how much weight I'd lost. And then I won a short film competition in Australia called Tropfest, and I met a production company that said, do you want to make a feature film? And at the time, there was lots of media starting to come out about sugar, and the camps were very divided. Some people were saying it was poisonous, and other people were saying it was essential for health. So I thought the only way to actually find out the truth was to do an experiment on my own body and see what sugar does to us. So I was trying to think of a narrative of how to tell the story, and I was in a supermarket one day and started reading some labels and realised that sweet chili sauce, hoisin sauce, and barbecue sauce all has more sugar per serve than chocolate sauce. So I thought, I wonder if I could eat the average amount of teaspoons that most Australians are eating, which is 40 teaspoons of sugar a day, but if I could do it without having any junk food. So basically, I did an experiment where I ate the average amount of sugar, 40 teaspoons, but I had no soft drink, chocolate, ice cream, or confectionery. All the sugar I ate was found in perceived healthy foods like low-fat yogurts, muesli bars, cereals, sports drinks and whatnot. And I basically embarked on this experiment for 60 days. I had a team of scientists that were monitoring me, sports scientists, nutritionists, to watch over what I was eating. And very quickly, I got some pretty dramatic results. I might show you just a really quick clip from the film. There's the other clip, which just kind of shows the type of places where food and sugar is hidden that most people wouldn't be aware of.
Just right. Low-fat yogurt. There's 10 teaspoons of sugar. Here, just a bowl of plain Vital Wheats. So what I'm going to do this now equals that.
Time for my mid-morning snack. Now I could have this amount of frozen yogurt, or 11.
So it's lunch. I have this delicious piece of chicken here. Now I could add half a packet of this teriyaki chicken sauce. Or alternatively, now to wash it down, I could have one of these. Or
I'll take the sweet, you can take the sound. Every single minute, every single hour.
so it's the mid-afternoon slump. Now, as a pick-me-up, I could have this Go Natural Superfood Apple Strawberry Cranberry Ripple Bar, or I could have this 7-teaspoon water cracker sugar sandwich.
Take the sweet, you can take the sound. Every single minute, every single hour.
Right, that was a particularly difficult day of filming that day. But you can see the point of the film is to actually not instill fear in people and kind of demonize sugar. We're just trying to show the places that it's hidden that most people wouldn't be aware of, and especially for parents trying to give their kids healthy breakfasts and trying to do the right thing, that you can see the World Health Organization now says we should have 6 teaspoons of sugar a day for optimal health. And you can see even foods like that, how easy it is to get up to 35 or 40 teaspoons in a day. So that's the whole point of the film, just to try and raise that awareness. By the end of the experiment, after 60 days, I developed full-blown fatty liver disease, which a lot of the speculation around fructose in particular is that it turns to fat in our liver in a very unique way that other foods don't. So I developed fatty liver only after 18 days. By the end, it had almost turned into cirrhosis, where the liver hardens. And also the fat went out into my bloodstream and caused other complications. I was pre-type 2 diabetic. I had heart disease risks. I put on 9 kilos and had 10 centimetres of visceral fat around my waist, which is the kind of dangerous, toxic fat that we're trying to avoid. So this fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, was actually unheard of 35 years ago, and it's now affecting 1 in 4 people in the Western world, and also in children as well. So it's really, I guess this film has been well received in Australia because a lot of these foods people are giving their kids every day, people are eating them every day, and it's just to be more aware of what you are putting in your body. The other impact that sugar has that I discovered is also on the brain and the mental behaviour. So there's a lot of research now suggesting that it can affect your moods and your cognitive function and how you focus and concentrate in the day. But I also went to Oregon and went and put my brain into a scanner, and I had a chocolate milkshake, and all my reward centres lit up in the same way that nicotine, cocaine and sex does. Sugar activates all the same reward centres, and that's why it's very addictive for some people. Some people have more sensitive receptors than others, so we're more sensitive to it. I'm one of those people. And I'll show you a clip now that just explains what sugar does to the brain. And you can see in the film we've made it really accessible for kids as well. Now I'm going to climb into my own brain and see what effect sugar just had on it. Now, the first step is that we see what's called a cue, or a trigger, which in my case was the milkshake. It can be a picture of one or the real thing. Now, when we see this sugary cue or trigger, a chemical called dopamine is released in our brain. This is an evolutionary urge when sweetness was rare. So when we saw it, our brain said, get that, because you need it for quick energy and to feel good. Now, the next step is that we get the sugary item. We bring it to our mouth, and we taste its sweetness. It's then that chemicals called opioids, beta endorphins are released, and we feel terrific. Sugar lights up the same reward areas as nicotine, cocaine, and sex. But it doesn't last long. Now, if some of us eat sugary foods often enough and establish this happy feeling of reward, it can create subconscious or mindless habits, which are easily triggered by more images of sugary foods. Throw into the mix that the fructose half of sugar also affects our appetite control centres, plus the glucose half affects our moods. And suddenly, we have a very volatile combination on our hands.
One of the very interesting emerging
I think it's
findings
important for
in
me
this
just to maybe
literature
talk
is
about the influence of sugar and how it affects you guys and your industry. I think there's an important difference in the metabolism of sugar compared to alcohol in the liver. So when a lot of the alcohol is made, the fructose, which is the dangerous element, is burnt off in the fermentation process to make the alcohol. So you need to have a lot of alcohol to get the same levels of fatty liver that I got in such a short time. And the reason for this is that we haven't developed, or when our body was evolving, there wasn't a lot of fructose around in our environment. Fruits were seasonal, maybe some honey if you were brave enough to take on a beehive, but now fructose is 80% of our food supply. So what happens, we have this kind of enzyme called a fructokinase, which doesn't regulate. So it means that because it was so rare, once our body sees the fructose, it just hoovers it out of the body, puts it into the liver, and it turns it to fat very quickly. So this doesn't happen in most alcohol. Champagnes is obviously a bit higher in sugar. Dessert wines are also quite high in sugar, but sort of dry white wines, spirits, they won't have the same effect in the body. And I think it's important to understand that this fructose in sugar is 50% fructose, 50% glucose. And there are lots of alternative health sweeteners that are coming out now. And it's important to understand that some of them are very high in fructose. So agave, for example, is actually 90% fructose. So it's actually more dangerous and deleterious for you than table sugar. But again, if you're only having small amounts every now and again, it's going to be fine. It's just that if the companies start putting agave into their food products, replacing it as the sugar, that we really need to be concerned. So again, it's not to try and demonize these things. It's just making people more aware that, look, if you are going to have your cocktail or your drink at the end of the day, maybe don't have your apple juice and your low-fat yogurt on the same day, because that's going to get your teaspoon count up really high.
Exactly. Thank you. So I think that's Damon's experience, his own personal experience of actually eating hidden sugars and how that had a deleterious effect on his body in such a short space of time. I think we often think that sugar and the effects of sugar will happen to us later on in life, that perhaps as we're having cocktails or having a good time in bars and nightclubs, we don't necessarily have to worry about what we're consuming other than just the amount of alcohol we're consuming. We're constantly being asked to respect responsible drinking guidelines because alcohol is addictive and damaging. But as you can see from Damon's video and his experience, sugar too is addictive and damaging. And perhaps should we be considering responsible drinking in as much as we should be considering responsible sweetening when it comes to what we're consuming and what we're selling to our consumers. Just a quick reminder of the definition of a cocktail. I'm sure we all know this off by heart, but you'll see from as far back as 1806 that sugar is a fundamental part of cocktails. And sugar is the ingredient that we sell the most of after our spirits when we're producing cocktails. So it's not as though this is about food as such. We're not talking about sugar as the only problem in a food industry. We are as culpable, as responsible in the drinks industry when we consider that sugar is part of our cocktail DNA and has been since it was defined back in 1806. So what should we be doing? Are we part of this problem? Should we be more mindful? Should we be promoting responsible sweetening on our menus? Should we be encouraging our consumers to think more intelligently about how much sugar they're consuming? Should we be, in effect, giving our consumers more choice? Let's just have a quick look at sugar itself. What is it and how does it break down in the body? Because as Damon mentioned, fructose is probably the kind of Voldemort of the sugar world as we experience it in our industry. So sucrose, table sugar, is made up of is a deosaccharide made up of two monosaccharides, fructose and glucose. And glucose is the building block of life. We need it in the majority of our tiny cells in our bodies. It's what we use for energy. Fructose, on the other hand, is the sweet part of sugar. It's the stuff that we can't get enough of. It's the stuff that we need, that we seek out, as Damon mentioned, when we were back searching for berries and fruits in our Neolithic days. We would see a berry, we would consume it, and fructose would create some energy in the liver for us. When you separate the fructose from the fiber, if you produce a berry juice rather than eat the berry, what you do is concentrate that fructose, and it's metabolized in a very different way through the body. So, for instance, we have a glass of delicious-looking orange juice in the morning. You wake up, you're perhaps a little bit hungover, you reach for that refreshing glass of OJ, your liver has had a wonderful night out, metabolizing all that alcohol the night before, and you reach for that glass of orange juice because you think, hey, that's good for me, full of vitamin C, going to make me feel so much better. But this is actually what happens when it's metabolized through the body. It interferes with our appetite control. So you can have 2 oranges, but the amount of oranges that are contained in this glass of orange juice is probably up to 6 or 7. You won't be able to eat 6 or 7 oranges because that juice is combined with the fiber. And it's the fiber that will slow down the metabolism of fructose in the body. When you take the fiber out, you can consume as much OJ as you like. You can think about how many glasses of Tropicano that you can consume in one sitting, particularly if you're feeling less than healthy or maybe a little bit hungover. So fructose suppresses our appetite control. We can drink lots and lots of it. It impairs our gut integrity, so you get this delicious sounding thing called leaky gut, which sounds wonderful. Also contributes to visceral obesity. As Damon said, he put on 9 kilograms and put a lot of weight around his middle. Visceral obesity is one of the most dangerous fats. And very often it's the fat that you cannot see. So you might think you're healthy, and you might think that you are skinny and lean, but if you go through that machine that you went through and look at your internal organs, they could be surrounded by visceral fat, which will lead to issues later on in life.
There's actually a term for that now called toffee, which is thin on the outside and fat on the inside. And 20% of skinny people are actually metabolically unhealthy. So we all know probably the sad story of someone in his late 30s or early 40s who dropped dead of a heart attack while he was out running, super fit. That's because all the trouble is happening on the inside, and that's kind of what sugar's doing now. And more science is showing that. It doesn't show in the exterior, but you'll see it on the internal organs.
And of course, we're very familiar with cirrhosis of the liver because of the industry that we're in. But drinking fructose, drinking orange juice will contribute to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is just as damaging as fatty liver disease caused by alcohol consumption. So we need to be aware of the fact that we're consuming damaging liquids in the form of things like OJ or whatever, any other juices. These are just some interesting other ways that fructose will damage the body. And as Damon mentioned, this damage can happen very, very quickly. I don't know if Damon, you want to speak to some of the things that are up here that actually happened to you in the 60 days.
Well, look, I certainly, thankfully, didn't experience the tooth decay, but have spoken to a lot of scientists about this. And you know, obviously we look at a story in the film of a young boy in Kentucky, in Barberville, Kentucky, and he has 10 cans of Mountain Dew a day, and unfortunately his teeth are completely eroded. But I showed it to lots of dentists, and they said, don't think that only happens in these lower socioeconomic areas. We see this in the cities with parents that give their kids juices that think they're doing the right thing. There's just a combination of the fructose and the glucose that's in those drinks that particularly attack the enamel of your teeth, and so quite often that'll erode very, very quickly. Obviously, the type 2 diabetes is a very big one, which I experienced, pre-type 2 diabetes. That's a disease that now kills someone every 6 seconds worldwide. There's lots of other factors, but sugar is now seen as one of the major drivers of that disease. Kidney failure, again, in the way that there's levels of uric acid are affected in the blood. We looked at a scene in the film with an Aboriginal community where their kidney failure rates are 15 times the rest of Australia, and they're having about 6 cans of Coke a day in those communities. And also erectile dysfunction. I can relate to that. I suffered a similar thing during the experiment, as my girlfriend will attest. Depression, it's an interesting one. I've met a few people now in Australia that are starting to put research into this area. There's an institute called the Black Dog Institute in Australia, and they're funding research at the moment as the link between sugar and depression. And certainly there have been a lot of studies done now around the link between sugar and aggressive behaviour. We know that there's a term called reactive hypoglycemia, and when you have that sugar high and then you crash, the brain releases all these chemicals that can make you feel irritable and anxious. And there's a great set of studies done in Vermont, the University of Vermont, that looked at the effect of Coca-Cola on teenage boys and young adolescents. And those that had 5 cans or more a week showed incredible signs of violent behaviour. They've done studies in prisons where they've removed some of the soft drinks from the inmates and noticed suicide rates changed. Disruptive behaviour changed, even in schools now where detentions are going down when schools ban these energy drinks or sports drinks. So we're going to see a lot more science around this link between food and mental behaviour in the next 5 years, but it's very, very real from my experience.
And I think from our industry's perspective, linking alcohol and aggressive behavior is something that we're all very familiar with, which is why we have security on our nightclub doors. But consider what also could be contributing to that aggressive behavior if you realize that sugar could also be playing a major part in the aggressive behavior of some people that are also consuming alcohol at the same time. So just to be aware of the types of sugar that we should be more mindful of. Of course, simple syrup is sucrose, so we know that that's 50% glucose, 50% fructose. There's also honey and maple syrup, slightly less fructose, but still up there. For me, the one that I really do have an issue with is agave, particularly as agave is touted as a healthy sugar. I see many, many cocktail menus with their skinny girl cocktails, and all of them list agave as the sweetening agent. So let's just be aware of the fact that agave is 90% fructose. You combine that with alcohol, that is 100% being metabolized by the liver. If the liver is overloaded, then the liver will store that immediately as fat, the worst type of fat, and will lead to the issues that Damon's explained. So there is no way that we could describe agave as a healthy sugar, particularly in the quantities that we use it in our business. I'm just going to quickly show you a little thing about why we use sugar in cocktails. We know why we use sugar in cocktails. It works to balance out the bitterness of alcohol. Many of our cocktails would be sour without it. We use it as a flavor enhancer. We use it to push flavor forward. We use it to contribute to texture and mouthfeel. We know that we have this, love affair with sugar in our industry. We use it as a base for many of our drinks. So to remove it entirely is very, very difficult for us to do. We know that. And we're not trying to scare you so that you run fleeing from this seminar and go, I have to only drink sour cocktails from now on, or all of my cocktails must be sugar-free. We appreciate that sugar plays a massive role in our industry. But what we would like to encourage people to consider is perhaps reducing the amount of sugar that they use overall. In the late 1900s, we went through a similar drying out of palates, a drying out of preference, which is why some of the dry vermouths were introduced to really reflect the fashion and the passion for drier, more elegant styles of cocktails. So if you just look at, hold on one sec. Thank you, Dave. Thanks. So being part of the solution for me really involves being more mindful about the amount of sugar that we use, abstaining from sugar in other areas of our lives, particularly personally if we're trying to reduce the amount of sugar we're consuming, using less sugar in cocktails, but also I know, particularly I lived in New York for a few years, and I would go to a bartender and ask him if I could have a drier cocktail, or perhaps could have a margarita, but a dry margarita, and be sort of like snorted at or laughed at or made to feel like my taste wasn't worthy of the bartender's taste. We need to really stop being so arrogant in a way. We need to consider that some people are wanting to still have a fun night out with their friends and consume less sugar. So for me, it's really about providing more choice, more options for the consumer. Keeping the sugar attached to its fibers is another main one. So blending, bringing back the old blender, the blended cocktails. At Belvedere, we really try to produce a lot of blended drinks. And also using sugar alternatives or sweeteners that are lower in harmful sugars. But essentially for me, it's just about using less sugar overall.
Yeah. Can I just add too that the film's been out in Australia for about 3 months now, and it's amazing how often we get people writing to us about alcohol and asking what can I drink when I'm out. And I've had a lot of dealings with companies now that know that this message is coming. There's so much science starting to pour out around sugar that we're going to see a lot more sort of lower sugar products being released. We've seen Coke release their Coke Life on here recently. So it's a great opportunity for people here to get ahead of the curve and know that this is actually coming. People are going to want to request these lower sugar type drinks. And even if it's just making it clear that you've reduced the amount of agave as opposed to eradicating it entirely, just that people know that you might be conscious of this message, it's going to come. And in 5 or 10 years from now, it's going to look very, very different in terms of the landscape, because like with tobacco, we saw a sort of slow momentum and then eventually it got there, and absolutely it's going to happen with sugar as well.
Which sets me up nicely for a mini plug for Belvedere, because obviously That's why I'm up here to talk about Belvedere and sugar. There is no Belvedere in any of the Belvedere products that we produce. Belvedere is a Polish vodka, and we adhere to the 2013 geographical appellation for Polish spirits, which prevent us from adding sugar. So if anybody wants to find out where the spirit is hidden, the sugar is hidden in their spirits, you can just check out the System Bolek and the Alko Finlandia websites, and they will teach you which spirits contain sugars and which do not. So this is somewhere you can go to find out that information, which is important as well. Because as we all know, sugar is also hidden in many, many spirits, and vodka is a culprit. But those vodkas that are produced in Poland do not add sugar as part of the appellation. So you know now that there's no sugar in Belvedere, but are you aware of how much sugar that you're using or you're consuming when you're drinking perhaps your Belvedere and cranberry juice on a Friday or Saturday night? Just to give you a kind of quick heads up on how much sugar is contained in your mixes, and the cranberry juice is a key one for me because many people consume it thinking it's kind of good for you, because cranberry juice is again touted as a healthy juice, but just the sugar content of your Belvedere and cranberry would be 12 teaspoons of sugar in one glass. Imagine how many vodka cranberries you could consume in a sitting, drinking responsibly, of course. That's a little bit scary. 14.5 teaspoons in a frozen margarita. So we just need to be more aware, more mindful of the amount of sugar that we consume in our everyday long drinks. Not necessarily in our cocktails, but also the things that you might just have on a Friday or Saturday night with your friends. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. This is a standard UK formula for a classic cocktail. This is actually the recipe for a margarita. Margarita? Dave? So 50 ml of tequila, 25 ml of triple sec, 25 ml of lime juice. So it's a pretty standard pour. What I would suggest is that if you just bring down the amount of sweetener that's in there, just by a little bit. The drink might be a little bit shorter in the glass, but you can make an overall reduction of 36% just by adjusting the amount of sugar that we're using, and not by much. So 50 ml of sugar versus, so just taking it down by 10 ml. So it's not a lot of reduction, but over the course of an evening, if you're drinking 3 or 4 of those cocktails, that adds up to a lot of sugar that you're avoiding if you're just reducing the amount of sugar in that drink. So the other ways to reduce the amount of sugar in cocktails, of course, if you take sugar out, you're going to be missing some flavor. So how do we push flavor forward? By removing the sugar. Well, we can use bitters. We love bitters. Bitters will push the perception of flavor forward. They come with much less sugar. They're highly concentrated in flavor. So we can lean a little bit harder on bitters, perhaps. Herbs, spices, salts, etc. These all add to the complexity of a cocktail. But also remembering that cinnamon, vanilla, nutmeg, they all increase the perception of sweetness. So you can reduce the overall sugar content, but adding vanilla or adding cinnamon will convince the brain that this cocktail is sweeter than it actually is. You can make your own syrups and liqueurs, and then you know exactly what you're using, bearing in mind that some liqueurs and syrups also contain high fructose corn syrup. So you want to avoid that where possible. So we encourage you to make your own if you can. And then finally, keeping the fruit with the fiber is the best way to consume fruit in a cocktail. So blend, blend, blend. Also, you'll notice that I'm accompanied on stage by these lovely large Imbibe bottles. So Imbibe London produce cold-pressed cocktails. And these guys have partnered with us to produce 2 cocktails that we created that were very, very low in fructose and are 100% cold pressed. So again, keeping all of the nutrients with the juice, which will help the body metabolize that sugar. So using sugar in smarter ways, this is just a quick summary of the fiber and fructose content of many fruits that we use. And really just a kind of shout out to the blender. We might have to revisit the Tom Cruise era of cocktails in order for us to keep those fibers with the fructose to make delicious cocktails. So just a word to sum up on the reality of the situation that we're in. We read about sugar in the media. I'm sure some people are here thinking, well, you know, I don't have a weight problem. I don't need to worry about what I eat and drink. I'm not on a diet. But this is an industry-wide issue. We need to be more mindful, more aware of the amount of sugar that we are selling to our consumers, to our guests. Because this is now becoming a political conversation in the UK. And in fact, this Telegraph piece came out 2 months ago, communicating on the UK Health Minister really speaking about the possibility of a future sugar tax. And of course, our friend Jamie Oliver has implemented a 10p tax on all drinks that are served in his restaurants as a way to try to raise funding, raise awareness, and help deliver education, particularly for children. But you know what Jamie Oliver does, we tend to kind of follow suit. So I think for me, it's really about being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. Self-regulating, being proactive, rather than waiting to be regulated and therefore not having as much choice as we would like as we try to manage that conversation.